Why did no one look at her when she stepped off the transport truck? The dust settled before the silence did. Boots hit cracked concrete, one soft thud among hundreds that had come before it. No announcement, no welcome, just another body in uniform carrying a single duffel walking into a place where attention was currency, and she had none. Rhea Calderon kept her eyes forward anyway. She had learned long ago that attention was rarely a gift. Sometimes it was a threat. The wind tugged at her sleeves as she crossed the open ground toward admin. Somewhere behind her, laughter, low, casual, the kind that didn't bother to hide what it meant, fresh meat. Re-echelon, she didn't turn, she never turned. Her heartbeat stayed even. She had practiced that too. Inside the office, paperwork moved faster than people. A stamp hit the page, an eyebrow lifted. Nothing else. No questions. No curiosity about why a logistics specialist had been attached to a frontline unit already running hot. Nobody ever asked when the answer might complicate things. She hadn't even found her bunk when he blocked her path. Logan Price leaned against the barracks doorway like it belonged to him, toothpick in his mouth, time on his side, rank stitched into his chest like a shield. He didn't speak at first. He didn't need to. His eyes did the work, slow and deliberate, taking inventory like she was gear someone had forgotten to lock up. She tried to step around him. He shifted, not touching her, never touching her, just enough to make the message clear. "You haven't earned this roof," he said quietly, pointing past her toward a sagging shed near the latrines. "Trash goes with trash." Two younger soldiers watched from the shadows, learning, always learning. That night in the mess hall, the room didn't go silent. It just adjusted, like a body bracing for impact. Logan sat dead center, boots kicked up, laughter loud. When she passed, his voice followed her. "Wrong zip code, sweetheart." She didn't react, sat alone, ate slowly. When he dumped dirty water beside her tray, when he took her apple and crushed it between his teeth, when juice ran down his chin like a dare, she didn't flinch. Inside, something tightened. Not anger, not fear, calculation. This place protected performance, not people, and silence was the entry fee. What he didn't know, what no one here knew yet, was that silence was something she understood better than any of them. What kind of person holds a push-up position while bleeding into the gravel? The morning air was still cool when the platoon fell in. Logan smiled when the captain told him to assess the new transfer. The workout he called wasn't an assessment. It was a statement. 4 miles in boots, then calisthenics, then logs usually reserved for punishment. Rhea didn't protest, didn't negotiate, she lined up. She ran mid-pack, breathing steady, refusing to chase pride or flee humiliation. By the end, her time beat half the unit. Logan noticed. He always noticed. He took them to broken ground next. Gravel, glass, thorns. He made her hold position while others stretched. Kicked stones into her face as he lectured about weakness. Blood pooled under her palms. Her arms didn't shake. 20 pull-ups, clean, no sway, no noise. The log didn't drop. Something shifted, not respect, suspicion. When he poured out her water and told her to fetch the canteen like a dog, no one moved. Shame hung thicker than heat. Rhea clipped the canteen back onto her belt without drinking. That afternoon, when a heavy weapon jammed and panic spread, she fixed it in 3 seconds. Not showy, not loud, surgical. Logan punished her for it anyway. That night near the supply tents, he finally touched her. His hand was heavy, confident, certain. For a moment, the world narrowed to pressure and breath. Old memories stirred, other places, other nights, other silences. She trapped his wrist and dropped him to his knees before he could understand what was happening. "Don't," she said. She walked away before power could turn into permission. Logan told himself it was luck. He needed to believe that. Why would someone destroy a woman's things instead of her body? The locker raid came next, clothes on the floor, letters crushed under boots, a framed photo cracked for effect. He waited for tears. She gave him nothing. Silence unnerved him more than resistance ever could. Whispers followed. Glances vanished. A counseling form slid across a desk and into a shredder without being read. The machine chewed up her words like they'd never existed. She signed, she nodded, she watched. She wasn't looking for help anymore. She was confirming patterns. During a field exercise, he gave her broken equipment and extra weight, set a pace meant to break people. She stayed glued to his heels, adjusted straps until skin split, never fell back. When he tried to humiliate her with navigation, she corrected him calmly. He marched them the wrong way out of spite. During combatives, he hurt her legally, laughed while doing it. She absorbed it, let him believe he was winning. That night, a doctor noticed scars that didn't belong to clerks, numbers that didn't belong to logistics, a code he hadn't seen in years. He sent a message up the chain. The isolation deepened. Logan punished anyone who helped her, made a young private vomit for lifting with her. She lifted alone. Her eyes changed then, not cold. Focused. Why didn't she report what he was planning to do to her? Because she already knew the answer she'd get. Instead, she prepared. Tripwires light, documentation, boots on, knife close. When the door turned and light flooded the hall, men froze, retreated, exposed. She didn't chase them. Morning came with rotors. A colonel stepped onto the parade field and ignored everyone until he stood in front of her. He saluted. Logan's certainty collapsed in real time. When she took charge of the formation, something ancient woke in her posture. The disguise fell away, standards surfaced, truth followed. Evidence rolled, silence broke, loyalty inverted. One by one, the platoon turned their backs on Logan. Not because she demanded it. Because fear was finally gone. What happens after justice when the noise fades? Rhea stayed long enough to rebuild what had been hollowed out. Then she left the way she arrived, quiet, uncelebrated, unburdened. Some places don't change because someone screams. They change because someone endures long enough to remove the cover. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the silence around her feel heavier than the rucksack digging into her shoulders? By the second morning, Rhea Calderon understood the terrain better than any map could explain it. Not the perimeter, not the firing lanes, the people, the invisible boundaries that decided who mattered and who didn't. Silence wasn't just tolerated here, it was enforced. And the loudest men weren't the most powerful. They were just the most protected. She moved through the day with that knowledge pressing against her ribs, a constant weight that required discipline to carry. Every step, every glance forward instead of sideways was deliberate. She could feel eyes on her, measuring, waiting for the smallest crack. She gave them none. Logan made sure she didn't forget her place. At PT formation, he walked the line like a bored predator, stopping just long enough near her to let his shadow fall across her boots. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The men noticed. They always noticed. Power was contagious like that. The run was longer than announced, the pace faster. When someone fell back, Logan blamed her presence. "We're dragging because some people don't belong here," he shouted, not looking at her, which somehow made it worse. She felt the resentment ripple through the formation, felt it brush against her like heat from a fire she hadn't lit. Her lungs burned, but not from the run, from restraint. After PT came work details designed to isolate. Inventory alone. Lifts meant for 2 people assigned to 1. Radios with dead batteries. Tools that mysteriously went missing when she reached for them. It was harassment without fingerprints. Plausible deniability turned into a daily ritual. She adjusted. She always adjusted. At the range, she stacked ammo with mechanical precision, counting by feel, aligning crates until the lines were perfect. The repetitive motion grounded her, pulled her away from the way Logan's voice lingered too close to her ear when he passed. "You're awfully calm," he murmured once. "Makes a man wonder what you're hiding." She didn't look up. "Just doing my job, Sergeant." He laughed softly, like that answer amused him. Later, when the machine gun jammed and panic spread, she stepped in without thinking. Muscle memory took over. The weight of the weapon felt familiar in a way she hadn't expected to feel again. When the bolt slid free and the gun cleared, the moment snapped shut around her. She stepped back as if nothing had happened. Logan's reaction came fast and loud. He needed it too, needed to reassert the story he'd been telling everyone. He punished her not because she was wrong, but because she had been right in front of witnesses. That night alone near the supply tents, the air felt different, thicker. The generators hummed like distant insects, masking footsteps until they were too close. Logan's presence filled the space before his words did. Confidence rolled off him, unearned and unquestioned. "You don't talk much," he said, stepping into her light. "That usually means you're trying to prove something." She kept writing. The numbers steadied her hands. "Girls like you," he continued, closer now, "always think it's equal out here." His hand landed on her shoulder. For a split second, time fractured. She wasn't in the supply yard anymore. She was somewhere else, somewhere darker, somewhere she had survived by learning exactly how much to give and how much to withhold. The flash passed, focus replaced it. She dropped him before he could finish the thought forming behind his teeth. Controlled, efficient, enough to hurt, not enough to expose. When she leaned in to warn him, her voice didn't tremble. "Don't." She walked away with her pulse steady, aware of him behind her, stunned more than injured. She knew what he would do next. Men like him didn't retreat. They escalated. The locker raid was proof. She returned to find her world turned inside out. Personal items scattered like evidence of a crime no one would document. Logan stood in the center of it, holding the only thing that mattered, a photo from a life before uniforms swallowed everything. When the glass cracked, something in her chest did too. Not loudly. Quiet fractures were more dangerous. She picked up the photo after he tossed it away, brushed the shards into her palm and placed it back where it belonged. Her silence followed him out of the room. It followed him for days. The whispers grew, not about him, about her. How she didn't fit, how she wasn't integrating, how she brought problems. Captain Vance slid a form across the desk and avoided her eyes. "There's talk," he said, already tired of the conversation. "Sign this." She read it carefully, signed, watched him file it away like closure. Outside the office, Logan's smile waited for her. "Told you," he mouthed. She walked past him without slowing, something cold and patient settling behind her eyes. The field exercise was meant to break her publicly. Broken gear, extra weight, a pace designed to exhaust everyone else just enough to turn them against the source of their misery. She felt the pack frame bite into her shoulders until skin tore. She adjusted and kept moving, stepping into Logan's footprints like she'd been trained to do a lifetime ago. By the time they halted, he was bent over, gasping. She stood upright, scanning the horizon. The contrast unsettled the men more than any speech could have. During land navigation, he tried to humiliate her intellectually, speaking slowly, loudly, as if to a child. She corrected him calmly, precisely. When he ignored her and marched them the wrong way out of spite, she followed, documenting, remembering. Combatives training was the first time he heard her openly. He paired himself with her under the pretense of instruction. His weight crushed. His forearm pressed her throat until the edges of her vision dimmed. He laughed while doing it, confident in the protection of mats and witnesses trained to look away. She let him believe she was enduring because she was weak. When his wrist buckled on her core, confusion flickered across his face. It was brief. He covered it with anger. She stored it away. The medical exam came days later. Routine on paper, unavoidable in practice. Dr. Moore's hands were careful, his eyes observant. When the numbers climbed too high, when scars didn't match her file, Recognition dawned slowly, then all at once. She saw it happen, the moment he understood. She gave him nothing, not confirmation, not denial, just a look that asked him to choose what kind of man he was. The isolation deepened after that. Logan made an example of anyone who helped her. When a private tried to lift with her and paid for it until he vomited, something hardened inside her chest. She lifted the generator alone, muscles screaming, gaze fixed on Logan's face. He was still smiling, he still felt untouchable. When she finally attempted to file a formal complaint, Captain Vance fed it into a shredder without reading a word. The sound of paper tearing was louder than any shout could have been. "Understood, sir," she said, and meant something entirely different. That night she overheard Logan planning a welcome party for her. Duct tape, darkness, laughter. She didn't confront him, didn't report it. She prepared. Tripwires, light, documentation. She slept fully dressed, senses tuned to the smallest change in air. When the doorknob turned and the hall exploded into brightness, she saw fear for the first time, not in herself, but in the men who had come to teach her silence. They retreated. They always did when exposed. Rhea lay back down, heart steady, staring into the dark long after the light faded. She wasn't broken. She wasn't helpless. She was waiting. And somewhere deep inside, beneath layers of restraint and patience, a different kind of resolve took shape. Not revenge, not anger. Accountability. Because endurance wasn't weakness, it was timing. What changes inside a person when waiting turns into certainty? The morning after the failed intrusion felt sharper, like the air itself had been honed overnight. Rhea noticed it immediately. The way voices dropped when she entered a space, the way eyes tracked her a half-second longer before darting away. Fear had entered the room, but it hadn't chosen her. It had chosen unpredictability. And unpredictability was the one thing this place couldn't tolerate. Logan acted like nothing had happened. That was the most telling part. He laughed louder. He corrected harder. He stood closer than necessary during briefings, his presence a deliberate test of boundaries he believed were still his to define. He wanted to reclaim narrative control, to prove to himself and everyone else that the previous night hadn't shaken him. Rhea watched without reacting. She understood escalation cycles. She studied them, lived them, survived them. This wasn't chaos, it was pattern. At the morning brief, Logan inserted another casual dig. "We don't carry weak links forward," he said, eyes sliding past her without landing. "They get people hurt." A few men chuckled. Others stared straight ahead, jaws tight. No one spoke. Rhea sat 3 rows back, hands folded, breathing slow. She felt something unfamiliar stirring beneath her ribs, not anger, not fear. Resolve sharpened by clarity. The kind that only arrived once the last illusion fell away. After the brief, she went about her duties with meticulous care. Every inventory number double-checked, every serial logged. She knew eyes were on her now, looking for mistakes that could be paraded as proof. She gave them none. Logan shifted tactics. He stopped addressing her directly. Instead, he punished the space around her. Schedules changed without notice. Equipment was reassigned mid-task. She was blamed for delays she hadn't caused. The men felt it. The resentment brewed. That was the point. One afternoon, she was moving a generator across the motor pool when a young private instinctively grabbed the other handle. The movement was small, human. Logan's reaction was not. He descended with a fury that froze the air. His voice tore into the kid until words lost meaning, until the sound alone carried humiliation. He ordered burpees, then more, then more. The private's face went pale. His breathing went ragged. When he vomited into the dirt, Logan didn't stop. "Watch," he shouted at Rhea. "This is what happens when you help weakness." She stood there, fingers locked around the generator handle, every muscle in her body coiled tight. Old instincts screamed at her to intervene, to end it, to break something that would not be fixed quietly. She didn't move. Not because she didn't care, because she did. When Logan finally waved the private away, she lifted the generator alone and carried it the rest of the way. The weight bowed the metal frame. Her steps remained even. The men watched in stunned silence, something shifting behind their eyes. The story they'd been fed didn't fit what they were seeing anymore. That night she wrote everything down: dates, times, names, patterns, not because she expected justice to arrive gently, but because truth required structure to survive impact. She attempted the formal route one last time, walked into Captain Vance's office with a neatly typed memorandum, precise and unemotional. He didn't read it, didn't pretend to. He fed it into the shredder while maintaining eye contact, as if daring her to react. "In this unit, we handle problems at the lowest level," he said, already reaching for his mouse. "Don't clutter my desk with personality conflicts." The shredder whined, paper turned to confetti. Rhea nodded. "Understood, sir." She meant it. From that moment on, she stopped asking for permission. She began preparing for exposure. She adjusted her routine subtly, shifted movement patterns, logged anomalies, set quiet safeguards. She did confront, she documented, the difference mattered. Dr. Moore's presence became more frequent after that, always professional, always quiet. He asked routine questions with layered intent. She answered only what was required. Their conversation stayed within regulation, but understanding lived in the pauses between words. When he noticed new bruising during a follow-up exam, his jaw tightened. "Training injury?" he asked. "Yes," she said truthfully. He nodded, but his eyes said he didn't accept the simplicity of the answer. He was collecting his own evidence now. She let him. Logan grew bolder as the days passed. Protection emboldened him. Captain Vance's silence felt like endorsement. He bragged openly near the motor pool about a welcome ritual he had planned: duct tape, darkness, laughter. He described it like a joke everyone was expected to enjoy. Rhea listened from behind a stack of tires, face unreadable. That night she didn't sleep much. She set her perimeter carefully, muscle memory guiding her hands as she tied cord and placed light sources with surgical precision. When she lay down, boots still on, she felt the familiar calm of readiness settle in. Not fear, not anticipation. Clarity. When the tripwire snapped and light flooded the hall, the men froze. Fear finally found its mark. They retreated in curses and confusion, never seeing her sitting upright in the dark, already recording, already cataloging. The next morning broke differently. The entire company was called to the parade field without explanation. That alone was enough to set nerves humming. When the Black Hawk dropped onto the helipad, kicking up dust and sending hats flying, confusion turned to speculation. The colonel stepped out without ceremony. His presence cut through the formation like a blade. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. His eyes scanned the ranks, then locked forward. "Sergeant Major," he said, "front and center." Logan straightened, chest puffed, certainty still clinging to him. He believed this was his moment: validation, recognition, maybe even reward. The colonel walked past him without a glance. He stopped in front of Rhea. The silence that followed felt unreal, like the world had paused to take a breath. The colonel rendered a sharp, deliberate salute, not casual, not symbolic. "Respect." Rhea returned it without hesitation, movement snapping with an energy she had kept sheathed for weeks. In that instant, the disguise dissolved. The logistics clerk vanished. Something else stood in her place. "Today's evaluation will be administered by the Navy's top physical training specialist," the colonel announced. "Staff Sergeant Rhea Calderon will take charge." Shock rippled through the formation. Logan's face drained of color. His mouth opened, then closed, his mind scrambling to rebuild a reality that no longer existed. Rhea stepped forward, voice calm, carrying without force. "Platoon, attention." Boots snapped together. Reflex overrode disbelief. She walked slowly toward Logan, stopping inches from him, mirroring the invasion of space he'd perfected. She studied his stance with professional detachment. "Your feet are too wide, Sergeant," she said quietly. "Fix it." The words landed harder than a shout. He froze. "I said fix it." He moved, clumsy and rattled, stripped of authority in a single sentence. Around them, the men watched something fundamental break. She ran the evaluation with ruthless precision. No insults, no theatrics, just standards, data, truth. Weakness exposed without cruelty. Performance measured without favoritism. When it ended, the colonel called Logan and Captain Vance forward. A screen dropped, footage rolled, night vision, body cam, medical logs, patterns stitched into undeniable sequence. Logan tried to speak. His voice cracked. The colonel silenced him with a look. Military police stepped forward. Logan looked to his men, desperate now. "Tell them," he pleaded. "Tell them I'm the best NCO you've got." One by one, the platoon turned away from him. Not dramatically, deliberately. A wall of backs where loyalty had once been fear. Rhea stood still, watching the truth take its final shape. When Logan lunged toward her, screaming betrayal, she didn't flinch. She waited until the noise settled before speaking. "No," she said evenly, "you did this yourself." She requested permission to address the company. The colonel nodded. "Effective immediately," she said, voice steady. "This unit retrains under new standards. Anyone who can't meet them transfers out. Anyone who covered misconduct faces review." No anger, no triumph. Just accountability. As Logan was escorted away in cuffs, something quiet settled over the field. Not relief, not celebration. Recognition. Rhea exhaled slowly, a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Waiting was over. Now came the reckoning. What happens when the storm passes, but the ground is still shaking beneath your feet? The field didn't erupt after Logan was taken away. There was no cheering, no whispered victory, just a strange, unsettled quiet, like a structure had been removed and everyone was suddenly aware they'd been leaning on it without realizing how rotten it was. Rhea felt it in the way men avoided her eyes now, not with contempt but with uncertainty. Fear had changed direction. Respect hadn't fully arrived yet. She stood where she was until the colonel dismissed the formation. Only then did she let her shoulders drop a fraction. Not relief, just recalibration. The moment had passed, but the consequences were only beginning. Captain Vance was relieved before noon. His office was emptied by admin staff who didn't look at him any more than he'd looked at her. Paperwork moved fast when it finally moved at all. 3 other senior NCOs were pulled aside quietly, their faces pale as they were escorted into offices with doors that closed firmly behind them. The ripple widened, just like she'd expected. Rhea didn't take satisfaction in it. She took notes. That afternoon, she walked the base alone, observing the aftermath like an investigator returning to a familiar crime scene. Conversations stopped when she passed, then resumed in lower tones once she moved on. Some men nodded now, others stiffened. A few looked ashamed. Shame was tricky. It could either rot a place further or force it to clean itself. She didn't care which path they chose, only that the rules were no longer invisible. The first retraining session began the next morning before dawn. No speeches, no warnings, just a clipboard, a stopwatch, and standards written in plain language. She didn't yell. She didn't insult. She corrected form with a hand placed precisely where it belonged, voice level, expectations absolute. Some of the loudest men from before failed early, not catastrophically, quietly. Small breakdowns in endurance, sloppy mechanics under fatigue, the kind of weaknesses that had always been there, hidden by bravado and paperwork. Watching them confront that reality was harder than watching them be punished. Ego resisted longer than muscle. A few tried to push back. "This isn't how we usually." She cut them off without raising her voice. This is how it is now. No debate, no explanation. Standards didn't argue. Others surprised her. Men she'd barely noticed before stepped into the work with grim determination, absorbing correction, adjusting, improving. They didn't need encouragement. They needed permission to try without being ridiculed. She gave them that by treating them exactly the same as everyone else. At night, when the base settled into its uneasy quiet, Rhea found the silence harder than before. During the ordeal, survival had been linear. Endure, document, wait. Now there was space. Space invited memories. She sat on her bunk, boots unlaced but still on, staring at the cracked wall. The past didn't come back as images at first. It came as sensation, pressure on her shoulder, a voice too close to her ear. The moment before choice collapsed into inevitability. She breathed through it, counted, let it pass. Strength wasn't about being untouched. It was about continuing anyway. Dr. Moore checked in regularly, professionally concerned but careful not to intrude. One evening, as he finished reviewing her vitals, he paused longer than usual. "You know," he said quietly, not looking at her, "what you did changed more than one career." Rhea nodded. That was the point. He hesitated. It also changed outcomes we'll never be able to measure. She met his eyes then. Those matter more. He nodded once, understanding exactly what she meant. Not everyone adjusted smoothly. A few men requested transfers within the first week. Others were quietly flagged for review. The unit felt leaner, tighter, less noise, more work. The air changed, not lighter but cleaner. One evening, a private approached her after training. He stopped a careful distance away, hands clenched at his sides like he wasn't sure where to put them. "Staff Sergeant," he said, voice unsteady, "I just wanted to say I'm sorry." She waited. For not saying anything before. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Rhea studied him for a moment, seeing the fear there, not of her, but of the truth he was still learning to live with. "What matters," she said finally, "is what you do next time." He nodded, relief and responsibility colliding in his expression. That night she wrote again, not evidence this time, reflection, lessons learned, protocol adjustments. She stripped emotion from the words not because it wasn't there but because emotion didn't survive scrutiny the way clarity did. Her orders came quietly, folded into an admin packet like an afterthought. Rotation complete. New assignment pending. No ceremony. No farewell formation. Exactly how she preferred it. On her last morning, she ran the perimeter alone as the sun crept up, casting long shadows across the concrete. Her breathing fell into rhythm, muscles warm and cooperative. The base looked different now. Not redeemed, not perfect, but altered, the cracks exposed. She passed the supply tents where everything had almost gone wrong. The barracks hallway where light had once flooded darkness. The parade field where fear had changed sides. None of it pulled at her the way she expected. When she boarded the transport truck with the same single duffel, a few men watched from a distance. No comments, no jokes, just acknowledgement it was enough. As the truck rolled out, dust rising behind it, Rhea rested her forearms on her knees and closed her eyes. She didn't feel victorious. She felt tired and proud and quietly hopeful in a way she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. She knew there would be other units, other Logans, other systems that protected performance over people. She also knew something else now. Silence wasn't always surrender. Sometimes it was strategy. Sometimes it was the space you needed to line up the truth so that, when it finally spoke, it couldn't be ignored. And sometimes, endurance wasn't about surviving what was done to you. It was about staying intact long enough to change what came after. What stays with you after you leave a place that tried to erase you? The road away from the base was rough, each jolt of the truck a reminder that motion didn't mean distance, not really. Rhea watched the perimeter fence slide past through the open slats, the coils of wire catching the sun like something sharp and unfinished. She didn't look back once the gate disappeared. She learned that some places only existed to teach you what you would no longer tolerate. The new assignment came without ceremony. A different airstrip, different faces. Same quiet curiosity when she stepped off the transport with one duffel and no entourage. This time she felt it immediately, the way the room weighed her, not dismissive, assessing. A place that measured first and decided later. She preferred that. Her role here was temporary by design. Evaluation, calibration, bring the numbers back into alignment. No grand introduction, no explanation of where she'd come from, just a name on a roster and a responsibility that carried its own gravity. The first briefing tested her patience. A room full of professionals who spoke in abbreviations and assumptions, who interrupted without realizing they were doing it. Old habits didn't vanish just because one unit had been exposed. They persisted in softer forms, more polished, more deniable. She let it happen. When it was her turn to speak, she did so calmly, outlining objectives without embellishment. She didn't argue when a lieutenant questioned her projections. She simply waited until the data caught up to her words. It always did. In the evenings, when the base settled into its unfamiliar quiet, the weight returned, not as fear, as residue. The mind had a way of replaying what the body had endured once the threat was gone, like it finally felt safe enough to process. She sat on her bunk one night, hands resting on her thighs, breath measured. The memory surfaced without warning, not the act itself, never that first, but the moment before. The certainty in someone else's voice, the assumption of silence. Her jaw tightened. She didn't push the thought away. She let it pass through her, acknowledged, then released. Avoidance had never healed anything. Control came from choosing what stayed. The next morning, she ran until the thought loosened its grip. Sweat and rhythm pulled her back into herself. Movement had always been her language when words failed. Dr. Moore's message arrived encrypted and brief. Updates, outcomes, accountability continuing. He didn't congratulate her. He didn't apologize. He simply told her the truth had held under scrutiny. She closed the message and sat with the quiet that followed. Vindication was a strange thing. It didn't fill the space the way people imagined. It simply removed a pressure you hadn't realized you were carrying anymore. Weeks passed. The work continued. She corrected form, adjusted standards, documented progress. She noticed who listened and who resisted. Resistance wasn't always malicious. Sometimes it was fear wearing familiarity as armor. One afternoon, during a heat-soaked evaluation, a senior operator failed a benchmark he'd passed for years. He stood there afterward, hands on hips, eyes hard with disbelief. "That test is flawed," he said, not meeting her gaze. Rhea considered him for a moment. "Then it will expose that," she replied evenly. "Run it again tomorrow." He scoffed, but he showed up. And the next day he failed again. The third day he didn't. He didn't thank her. He didn't need to. Respect arrived quietly, like something earned rather than demanded. At night the dreams came less often, but when they did, they were vivid. Not violent, just close, too close. She woke once with her heart racing, fingers digging into the mattress like she needed proof of solidity. She sat up, breathing through it, reminding herself where she was, who she was. The past no longer had jurisdiction over her present. It only had memory. She began writing again, not reports this time. Pages without headings, thoughts without structure, questions she hadn't allowed herself to ask while surviving. What does healing look like when justice arrives late? What does strength cost when it's measured in silence? She didn't answer them. She let them exist. One evening, she found herself at the edge of the airfield watching aircraft lift into the darkening sky. The engine's roar vibrated through her chest, grounding and distant all at once. Movement without attachment. Purpose without permanence. A young officer approached hesitantly, stopping a respectful distance away. "Staff Sergeant," she said, "can I ask you something?" Rhea nodded. "How do you know when to push?" the officer continued, "and when to wait?" Rhea thought of gravel cutting into her palms, of tripwires and light, of silence used as shield and blade. "You listen," she said finally. "Not to noise, to patterns. When the pattern stops changing on its own, that's when you act." The officer nodded slowly, absorbing more than just the words. As the rotation neared its end, Rhea received another set of orders. Another place. Another temporary correction. She wasn't surprised. Systems resisted permanence when it came to change. They preferred it in doses. She packed her duffel the same way she always did. Minimal. Intentional. She left the notebooks behind, sealed and submitted. Evidence belonged to institutions. Reflection belonged to her. On her last night, she stood outside under a sky heavy with stars, the desert stretching wide and indifferent. She felt small in the way that reminded her she was part of something larger, not swallowed by it. She thought of the girl she'd been when she first learned silence, thought of how many years she'd believed endurance meant invisibility. The truth was more complicated. Endurance meant staying present long enough to choose a different ending. She boarded the transport before dawn. No one saluted. No one needed to. As the vehicle pulled away, she allowed herself one small, private moment of grief for what had been taken, for what had been survived, for the version of herself that had learned strength the hard way. Then she straightened, eyes forward. Healing, she understood now, wasn't the absence of pain. It was the refusal to let pain dictate the rest of the story. And her story wasn't finished yet. What do you become when the fight is finally over, but the echo of it still lives inside you? The final assignment came quietly as they always did. No build-up, no warning, just coordinates, a window of time, and a reminder that some problems required a human presence, not a memo. Rhea read the orders once, then again, letting the weight of them settle. This wasn't a test. It wasn't a correction. It was a mission that assumed competence and trusted restraint. She arrived before dawn, the sky bruised purple and gray, the air cool enough to sting. The facility sat low against the horizon, functional and forgettable by design. Inside, people moved with practiced efficiency, the kind that came from long familiarity with pressure. No one stared. No one underestimated her out loud. That alone told her this place had learned something, maybe not everything, but enough. The work was precise. Long hours, tight margins, decisions that carried consequences beyond the room they were made in. She moved through it with a calm that surprised even her, not because it was easy, but because she knew who she was now. There was no performance left to prove, no disguise to maintain. In the quiet moments between briefings, when the noise receded and the mind tried to wander back, she noticed the change. The memories still surfaced, but they no longer demanded obedience. They arrived like old weather patterns, recognizable, no longer controlling the forecast. One night after a long operational review, she sat alone on a concrete step outside the facility, helmet beside her, hands resting loosely on her knees. The stars were faint here, dulled by distance and light pollution, but she could still find them if she focused. She always could. She thought about the people she'd left behind, the private who'd apologized, the men who'd turned their backs when it mattered. Dr. Moore, steady and quiet, choosing integrity over convenience. Even Logan, less as a person now, more as a reminder of what unchecked power became when fear protected it. She didn't feel anger toward him anymore. That surprised her. Anger had fueled survival for a long time, but it burned fast and left little behind. What replaced it wasn't forgiveness. It was clarity. Some people were storms. You didn't reason with storms. You learned how to build structures that didn't collapse when they came. The mission ended without spectacle. It always did when things went right. No press, no praise, just confirmation and a quiet acknowledgement that the objective had been met. Rhea packed her duffel one last time, movements familiar, grounding. The ritual mattered. Before she left, a senior officer stopped her in the corridor. He hesitated, searching for words that wouldn't sound rehearsed. "We've implemented your recommendations across the board," he said finally. "There was resistance, but it's holding." Rhea nodded. "Standards usually do." He studied her for a moment. "You ever think about staying permanently?" She considered it, not because she wanted to, but because the question deserved respect. "Change works best," she said, "when it doesn't belong to one person." He smiled, accepting the answer for what it was. The ride out was quiet. The landscape rolled by, unremarkable and vast. Rhea rested her head back against the seat and closed her eyes, not to sleep but to listen to her own breathing, steady, present, unafraid of the quiet anymore. When she reached her final stop, there was no formation waiting, no handshake, just a small room, a clean desk, and time. Time was the most unfamiliar element of all. She unpacked slowly, set the duffel aside, sat on the edge of the bed and let the stillness settle. This was where many people expected the story to end, with peace, with closure, with a neat resolution that tied pain into a bow. But life didn't work like that. Healing wasn't a destination, it was a practice. She began to run again, not for standards or evaluation, but because it connected her body to the present. She wrote in the evenings, not reports, not reflections meant for anyone else, just words that traced the distance she'd traveled. She slept. She woke. She noticed the way her shoulders didn't tense as often when footsteps sounded behind her. One afternoon, she stood in front of a small group, no uniforms this time, just people. Some listened with guarded expressions, some with relief, some with recognition that hurt to see. She didn't tell her story in detail. She didn't need to. She talked about systems, about silence, about the cost of confusing endurance with consent, about how strength didn't always look loud, and how that misunderstanding had broken more people than any enemy ever had. Afterward, a woman approached her, eyes shining with something fragile and fierce. "I thought staying quiet meant I was weak," she said. Rhea shook her head gently. "Staying quiet means you were surviving," she replied. "Those aren't the same thing." That night, alone again, Rhea stood at the window and watched the city lights blink on one by one. Each light represented a life moving forward, carrying its own weight, its own unseen battles. She felt connected to them in a way she never had before, not because they shared her pain, but because they shared her humanity. She understood now that what she had done wasn't about revenge or redemption. It was about alignment, bringing truth and action into the same space and refusing to let them be separated by fear. Her phone buzzed with a message, brief, unadorned. Another unit, another request, not urgent, optional. She didn't respond right away. She sat with the choice, feeling the unfamiliar luxury of deciding from a place that wasn't under siege. Whatever she chose next would be deliberate, grounded, hers. As she turned away from the window, she caught her reflection in the glass. The woman looking back at her wasn't untouched. She carried scars that would never fully fade, but she also carried something stronger now, an unshakable sense of self that no one else could define or diminish. She wasn't silent anymore. She was selective, and in that selectivity lived her power. Some stories end with justice. Some end with healing. The rare ones manage both, but only because someone was willing to endure long enough to change the rules instead of breaking themselves against them. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And when it does, the world quietly, irrevocably adjusts.